We know that engagement with social media and our cell phones releases a chemical called dopamine. That's why when you get a text, it feels good, right? So, we've all had.
Peace and blessings, beautiful souls, magnificent beings. In this video, we're jumping into the effects of technology on the brain and on relationships. He's going into and talking about the dopamine. He's dealing mainly with the adolescents. I will extrapolate that out into the personal relationships of grown-ups, marriage, long-term relationships, etc. That most of the problems that we're dealing with nowadays is a combination of our inability to find pleasure in nature and our dependence on finding pleasure within technology. And I'm a technological type of guy. I love technology and will continue to love it, but we must look at the total aspect of how it can be detrimental as well as beneficial. It is definitely beneficial, but I believe it has exponentially made the working of two individuals within a relationship more difficult when it should make it a lot more easier. And it is easier for those individuals who understand how to still find joy within nature and use technology for its benefits, but not as the substitute for pleasure. So let's jump into it and allow him to continue.
Had it where you're feeling a little bit down or feeling a bit lonely, and so you send out 10 texts to 10 friends, hi, 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 because it feels good when you get a response, right? Right? It's why we count the likes. It's why we go back 10 times to see if my Instagram is growing slower. Did I do something wrong?
So I have to catch myself too, going back and looking at my likes and looking at the things and trying to not get tied into the fact that those things do create a sense of worthiness and a rush within you. I've experienced that myself, but that can't be the determining factor of what it is that brings you joy and what it is that brings you fulfillment. If that is the case, then you and I are in for a rude awakening when those things no longer exist, and we'll keep seeking for approval outside of the approval of self, which comes from within, which is the most important approval. Those things are good to have, but they should not be what we're seeking. So I have to catch myself as well, because I seek that stuff often.
They not like me anymore, right? The trauma for young kids to be unfriended, right? Because we know when you get a hit of dopamine, which feels good. It's why we like it. It's why we keep going back to it. Dopamine is the exact same chemical that makes us feel good when we smoke, when we drink, and when we gamble. In other words, it's highly, highly addictive.
So again, technology is giving us that dopamine rush that drugs, alcohol, sex, and other things that can become detrimental to our being if they are abused. So again, we must put technology into that equation so that we can properly understand how to use technology and to continue to develop and make our lives that much more, make our lives more comfortable. And with comfort comes a sense of relief. But at the end of the day, we must get used to being uncomfortable in a comfortable environment in order to continue to grow. So that's another subject for another video. We'll continue to deal with this dopamine. And again, my internal belief that technology has made relationships relationships more difficult due to the fact that many of us are getting our dopamine rush from the technology and not from nature and from other individuals. And this raises the threshold of dopamine that we need released in order to feel a sense of joy. So this is a deep thing, and this is probably one of the driving forces behind so much of the disappointment and the feeling of desperation and the lack of fulfillment that many individuals are feeling on a major level across the board, and leading to a lot of the subtle mental illnesses, depression, anxiety, panic attacks, and things of that nature. All right.
Right? We have age restrictions on smoking, gambling, and alcohol, and we have no age restrictions on social media and cell phones, which is the equivalent of opening up the liquor cabinet and saying to our teenagers, hey, by the way, this adolescence thing, if it gets you down. But that's basically what's happening. That's basically what's happening, right? That's basically what happened. You have an entire generation that has access to an addictive, numbing chemical called dopamine through social media and cell phones as they're going through the high stress of adolescence. Why is this important? Almost every alcoholic discovered alcohol when they were teenagers. When we're very, very young, the only approval we need is the approval of our parents. And as we go through adolescence, we make this transition where we now need the approval of our peers. Very frustrating for our parents, very important for us. It allows us to acculturate outside of our immediate families into the broader tribe, right? It's a highly, highly stressful and anxious period of our lives, and we're supposed to learn to rely on our friends. Some people, quite by accident, discover alcohol and numbing effects of dopamine to help them cope with the stresses and anxieties of adolescence. Unfortunately, that becomes hardwired in their brains, and for the rest of their lives, when they suffer significant stress, they will not turn to a person, they will turn to the bottle.
So again, he makes a pertinent point. What is happening with technology? He's using the point of alcohol. What is happening with technology is similar to what can and does happen with those who become alcoholic. Those who become addicted to technology, they have turned to the technology in order to numb any of the stresses of life instead of developing the emotional tools, the mental tools in order to cope with the stresses of life, in order to cope with disappointment and things of that nature. Many individuals, because they have been addicted to the technology from a youth, the games and things of that nature, they turn to that. And when that no longer suffices, or you have to get a higher level, just like with an alcoholic, and I used to drink heavy. I don't consider myself to have been an alcoholic, but I was able to drink a lot of alcohol for many years. And at one time I drank pretty much every day. Again, some people may call that alcohol. I was still functioning individual. I didn't feel like I needed it. I did it more in a social environment. I never had drinks at home and things of that nature. So the more you engage in something that spikes the dopamine and sets the level of dopamine higher, the more you're going to need in order to reach that level, in order to release that dopamine and feel that comfort that you once did. And this is why drugs, alcohol, and now technology can be very damaging to an individual that relies on that instead of developing the mental, the emotional, spiritual tools in order to deal with life. Again, this is a topic that is extremely important that we get a grasp on it and that we start to understand it, because again, you're seeing the fallout from it with highly emotional individuals who are very immature in their responses to life. And this is part of the chaos that you're seeing widespread amongst the youth as well as the adults. So allow him to continue.
Social stress, financial stress, career stress. That's pretty much the primary reasons why an alcoholic drinks, right? What's happening is because we're allowing unfettered access to these dopamine-producing devices and media, basically it's becoming hardwired. And what we're seeing is as they grow older, too many kids don't know how to form deep, meaningful relationships. Their words, not mine. They will admit that many of their friendships are superficial. They will admit that their friends, that they don't count on their friends, they don't rely on their friends, they have fun with their friends, but they also know that their friends will cancel on them if something better comes along. Deep meaning.
This is where I was getting at a few days ago. I didn't post anything on it, but the deep, meaningful relationships are not really being developed and not being cultivated because of the use of technology in a negative way, because we have not developed that within ourselves in order to use technology for what it's useful for, which is not the dopamine hits that you and I seek, but the creation of comfort and the expansion of ideas and innovations. You and I must develop from within the deep meaning connection to other human beings and get connected to nature and understand the basis of our existence. This brings us back down and grounds us in those things that will sustain us throughout our life, meaning a natural relationship, the development of emotional intelligence, the development of mental strength, the development of curiosity, of imagination, of connection. These are the things that are being broken apart within a society. I love trying to double that word up. A society that, or any society that is highly dependent on technology for relief, comfort, and pleasure of the mind, not using technology just to create a better and more fulfilled, more advanced human society. We're using it for, many of us are using it for the wrong reason. And you see it all over Facebook, Instagram, individuals really not, and excuse me if it offends you, really not talking about anything, always on it, selfies, just want to be seen, want to be heard, want to, over the trivial, a lot of trivial things. And you see it all the time. People talking about nothingness. And this is, again, they're getting a dopamine rush from any feedback that they get, superficial relationships via the internet. I love deep, meaningful relationships. I understand that nature is the basis of our being. So I look out into nature. I enjoy nature. I develop relationships with individuals that I know or I am getting to know, and I seek to develop those relationships by learning about the individual, their likes, their dislikes, and whatever business or venture that we may be able to engage in and with, or just a mentor mentee type relationship, or just a casual friendship. These things are meaningful, they are beneficial, they are necessary for the proper human development. Allow him to continue.
For relationships are not there because they never practice the skill set, and worse, they don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with stress. So when significant stress starts to show up in their lives, they're not turning to a person, they're turning to a device, they're turning to social media, they're turning to these things which offer temporary relief. We know, the science is clear, we know that people who spend more time on Facebook suffer higher rates of depression than people who spend less time on Facebook, right? These things balanced.
Ooh, you hear that? These individuals who are spending a ton of time, he uses the example of Facebook, are, the studies are coming back to show that the more time that these individuals who are depressed are on Facebook, they are more depressed than individuals who are not on Facebook to that degree. And this is alarming because, again, they're seeking to get a fulfillment via a superficial relationship instead of developing the tools and the coping mechanisms to deal with life and deal with other individuals and have that meaningful relationship with another human being. There's nothing more meaningful or more desirable or more important than having strong relationships with human beings. And many human beings find that extremely difficult. And I understand why in some cases. Trust me.
Alcohol is not bad. Too much alcohol is bad. Gambling is fun. Too much gambling is dangerous, right? There's nothing wrong with social media and cell phones. It's the imbalance, right? If you're sitting at dinner with your friends and you're texting somebody who's not there, that's a problem. That's an addiction. If you're sitting in a meeting with people you're supposed to be listening to and speaking, and you put your phone on the table, face up or face down, I don't care, that sends a subconscious message to the room that you're just not that important to me right now, right? That's what happens. And the fact that you cannot put it away is because you are addicted, right? If you wake up and you check your phone before you say good morning to your girlfriend, boyfriend, or spouse, you have an addiction. And like all addiction, in time, it'll destroy relationships, it'll cost time, and it'll cost money, and it'll make your life worse.
Woo! That's a powerful, powerful statement. And again, we must take these things into consideration. We must move on those things that we find within ourselves that may be causing us to engage in any behavior.
As an owner of Walton Goggins goggle glasses, I know how to make slick-looking goggles.
Excuse that. So again, have a beautiful day. If you like the video, please subscribe and like. Peace.